Hey, new series, video,
Yeah, hopefully you can see
your
us.
face, you
Yeah.
see mine. I was going to say it's been a while, but it hasn't been a while because we just saw each other over the weekend
Oh
in
yeah, I know.
person.
It was nice. It was nice. It was
Yeah,
great.
it's great seeing you. It's great seeing the family again.
Next time we get together in person, we should actually record something for the channel in person, which would be
We
interesting.
really should, especially with our mutual group of friends. I think we can really record some interesting content.
I think so too. It sounds like a few people there's a few people who are interested as well in guesting, but that's a whole other thing. Welcome back, guys.
Absolutely. But
Sound of
hey,
Music
how's it
time.
going, guys? It's been a while, and for our longtime fellow listeners, we've been following us since the King Crimson days. We have said that we've been wanting to expand outside of the discography series a little bit. We did our top 10 bands a few months ago. So we're doing it. We're doing something different. Only this is also going to be a series in of itself.
Yep.
We are calling this. Did we settle on a final name? I think we dabbled with something along the lines of Andy and Rob Rants.
Something like that. It's a rant series. We'll
It's a rant series. We can call it the rant series. Like it's typical us guys, right? We're thinking of these things as we debut new ideas.
yeah.
Rant series, Andy and Rob rant, whatever you want to call it. But we're gonna rant. And so how this is going to work is we're gonna pick a topic, we're gonna rant about it. We might agree on whatever it is we're ranting about. We might disagree. Um, it can go anywhere, right? How
Yeah.
this is going to be different from the main series, the Disog series, is that series is in depth, it's intense, and we really do a lot of research behind it. Whereas this, we're kind of for the most part just going for it, right?
Yep.
Uh, I got a few notes as always because it wouldn't be me to not have notes. But other than that, we're gonna ramble on. We're gonna rant on. And I think for this particular topic, in the bigger scheme of things, we're on the same page, but we just have different reasonings as to why
Yeah,
that
I think
is.
so. Yeah.
You want to tell us what we're gonna rant about today?
We're going to rant about the one thing that almost every music fan, at least every rock fan, loves to rant about: the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I
But
did a video on our channel about that a little bit after the nominees were
yes, you
announced.
did. So this is sort of like the sequel to that video in a
Yeah.
way.
Well,
So
I
for
think
those,
you said you watched it and you had a lot that you wanted to say about it, and there was definitely some stuff you disagreed with me on. But we can both at least agree that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is shit.
yeah, like I said, bigger scheme of things. Bottom line, we both agree it's bullshit, right?
yeah.
So that's going to be what we're ranting about today. But before we get right into it, tell the listeners what you're drinking today.
Well, I'm gonna be the boring one. I've got tea, Earl Grey, hot, to quote the great Jean-Luc
The
Picard.
Earl Grey.
I just got out of work. I'm tired. I need a little caffeine, but nothing that'll keep me up all night.
Fair enough, buddy. Fair enough. I'll be drinking the tea later myself. It's become like one of my like night rituals
Oh
as
yeah,
of late. Is after
same.
dinner, I drink the lemon green tea to sort of detox, right? Get all the bullshit out of my body. But right now, I'm rocking a beer, and I'm a little hesitant to show it on the screen. But I am drinking a Flying Dog, my go-to Flying Dog flavor, blood orange.
Nice, nice.
Great summer citrusy IPA. So that's what I'm rocking right
I love
now.
IPAs. So good. Ugh. Anyway, this isn't a beer podcast.
This isn't a beer
It
podcast,
could
but
be though.
we got to share what we're drinking. So, um, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Let's get into it. Um, Folks, this can go anywhere. Before we get into it, I do want to. So I think a good way to start this, Rob, is to give the definition of rock and roll. And the reason why I think this is important is, and we'll get into it later, is I think this is going to really summarize my points and my feelings on certain arguments throughout this rant. Okay, so this is the definition of what rock and roll is. You ready? A type of popular dance music originating in the 1950s, characterized by a heavy beat and simple melodies. Rock and roll was a amalgam of black rhythm and blues and white country music, usually based on a 12-bar structure and an instrumentation of guitar, bass, and drums. A couple words stick out in that definition for me. The one out of all of them, though, is amalgam. Amalgam, the definition of that word is a mixture of things, right? Combining different things. So that kind of transitions to, I think, something I wanted to bring out about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And my question to you is, what should be considered as an eligible act to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Well, I think I think what you're saying.
Music, or can we expand on that? I want to hear your thoughts.
I think what you're. I think you kind of actually highlighted the main problem with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and why it's so polarizing is because that's a very vague definition, and people have an idea, different ideas of what rock and roll is, what certain artists are, what certain subgenres, I guess, are rock and roll.
Sure, it's all subjective at the end of the day, right?
No, like I know, I remember watching the Ginger Baker documentary. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's really good.
That's a treat if you've ever watched that.
It's a very, very good documentary. But one thing he says in it is, it's like, it's music that doesn't fit in a box, you know, and he's getting like really mad about it. And that's very true. I don't like the idea of sometimes of putting music in boxes. But that being said, we do that so we can say, hey, you know, two bands may be heavy metal, for example, but they might sound completely different, you know. Sure. But I think if you were to use the word heavy metal, when you use terms like folk rock or progressive rock or whatever you want to say, hard rock, all the many different subgenres of rock, you kind of have an idea of what a band is going to sound like or what potentially is going to sound like. So when you say the word rock and you look at your Spotify playlists, you look at albums on Wikipedia and they say the genre and the subgenre on it, you can usually kind of have an idea of what is considered rock and what isn't. So
sure,
it's hard to say is my answer to you. That's part of the fundamental problem of, I guess, having a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Maybe having maybe the whole problem is the name in itself. Maybe it should just be called the Music Hall of Fame, or maybe it should be called the Popular Music Hall of Fame. But I feel like when you say rock, there's a certain expectation, and what that expectation is tends to vary person to person. But I think I don't know. For me, it's kind of like it's pretty easy to say that certain artists are rock, in my opinion, and then there's more of a gray area with other artists.
Sure.
I'm sorry to give you kind of a vague answer, but it's kind of a it's okay.
Question. So I think we gotta be really clear with our verbiage, though, right? So I heard you use the word rock a couple times. We're talking about rock and roll, so it's called rock and roll, and I agree with some of your points.
Yeah.
It could be up in the air in terms of, is the term rock and roll, is it vague? I actually think the opposite. I don't think it's necessarily vague per se. I kind of go back to that definition, right? When I think back about popular music as far back as the early 20th century, right? And to me, at the end of the day, it all comes down to blues, right? Everything is rooted in the blues. When, popular music first became a thing, there was classical music, right? And there was different, subgenres of classical, the Baroque period, the classical period, the Renaissance, et cetera, right? Once we really hit the early 20th century, we sort of shifted gears to blues, right? Again, danceable music, simple melodies, 12-bar structure, right? So when I think of 20th century and 21st century popular music, one way or another, right, it all goes back to the blues. Whether it is jazz, whether it is country or folk, whether it is rock music, right, or whether it's hip-hop music. So I know a lot of problems that people have with the Hall of Fame is that things like pop music is in the Hall of Fame, hip hop's in the Hall of Fame, right? That's not necessarily the issue I have, because at least in my brain, it's all rooted in the blues at the end of the day, or in rock and roll, right? But I want to hear your thoughts on that. I know you've been pretty vocal in the past as far as hip hop and things like that being in the Hall of Fame. So what are your thoughts with that?
I feel like I understand where you're coming from on in terms of influences, but you're also then it really opens the door for a huge amount of artists.
But I'm not talking about influences. Yeah, that's a whole separate thing right there that we'll get into. I just want to be clear. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, so you're saying what you're saying then? Any music that's rooted in the blues can be considered rock and roll? Is that what you're saying? Yes. Okay. That's like a huge amount of artists, man. Like I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if I necessarily I see where you're coming from, but I don't know if I necessarily think that would include every artist. I don't know. I also feel like maybe the definition and what people consider rock music has changed and evolved over the years. So it's kind of hard. Like I still think it's hard to put a total blanket definition to it, I guess. Sure. I think your argument's a good one. But I don't know. There's kind of, it's this whole, to me, there's kind of a baggage when you put a term like, I don't know, like when you just put something in the category of rock or I guess you're using the term rock and roll, that people don't conventionally consider rock and roll. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I still, like I said, I think you make a good point, but I still think it still feels sort of broad and vague to me in a sense, you know?
Yeah, and I can understand that. I think, and that's why I wanted to start with that definition, because I mean, like, obviously, like, you know, rock and hip hop, while they do have their similarities, right? They're very different things.
Yeah.
You know, what do they have in common? Well, really that rhythm section, right? At its core, they both have rhythm, that bass and that drums, right? Whereas hip hop, say, might focus more on that heavy beat. Rock might focus more on that melody side to it. And I can see where you're getting at, where that's kind of where like the vagueness sort of comes in.
Yeah, it becomes a gray area kind of at that point.
A gray area, sure, absolutely. That kind of does transition to my next point when you did bring up influences before. And I'm not sure if influence is the right word. I got to think about that as we continue our conversation.
I know one of the big criteria for a band to get in the Rock Hall of Fame is influence. And
is it though? So so that's what we're told.
Well, it's supposed to be. Yeah, this is part of the problem.
And this is where like one of my big issues come into play. To me, it's a fucking popularity contest. At the end of the day. I mean, I was, just before we recorded, I was going back and looking back at some of the nominees, which, by the way, goes all the way back to 1986, I believe, is when the Rock Theme first started. And actually, let's talk about some of those acts that first were inducted. So this is 1986, the first year of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You've got Chuck Berry, James Brown, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Fats Domino, the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, Elvis Presley. Now, in terms of influence, all of those artists should be on there, right?
Totally, yeah. It was a great place. It's a really good, solid foundation that they have there in the first year.
Now, going back to my definition, how many of those can you say are rock, right? Most of those guys are R&B. So, the argument with, and I'm not saying you specifically, but the argument of, should it be rock, And your point with that term being very vague, subjective, right? In my book, other than Buddy Holly, Elvis Presley,
Chuck Berry, I'd say.
Chuck Berry, those guys are all R&B, right? James Brown is R&B, maybe funk, whatever. Ray Charles is R&B. Fats Domino's is blues. The Everly Brothers are R&B. So it really, I guess the point I'm trying to make is because I think a lot of the counter arguments that people make, and again, I'm not saying you
No, yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of the counterpoints that people make are with more recent acts that have been inducted the last 10, 15 years. My point is really the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you can argue, has been controversial from the very beginning, right?
Yeah, but I feel like it's different though, because with those early artists, those early artists helped shape a genre that didn't really exist before then, or was emerging out of that. So, and because all of those different artists and more, blues, R&B, country, in some sense jazz, especially for some of the later bands and stuff, and even classical, all of those elements influenced rock. But if you're talking about artists, like contemporary artists now, or I guess it would be like maybe some of the more recent ones that are being inducted now from like the 90s and stuff, some of that stuff came out of rock or was influenced by rock, but I would argue haven't been as influential to rock as some of the artists that are mentioned, or that you just mentioned from the very beginning, that really forged what rock and roll would become. That's how I feel.
So yeah, right, and I mean,
and I think that's a huge difference. You know what I mean?
It's a huge difference, sure, and it's you know, it's true, right? These guys that we just named absolutely like really forged it. With at the end of the day, blues really being the core, the roots, right? Because all of these guys were influenced by Robert Johnson, etc. Right?
Right.
But you're right; these guys really were the ones shaped rock music, and I'm removing the rock and roll. I'm talking strictly rock music.
Yeah.
But something we were both saying before is rock evolves, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's really important to, yes, these guys really forged it, but with anything, you evolve, right? So I think it's really important to not dismiss some of those other later artists that were inducted or should be inducted, which we'll be talking about that too, even if at their core they're not rock music. You know what I mean?
Sure, and I would agree with that statement. But I completely agree with that statement. But I think with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there's been a lot of instances where, yes, maybe there's a perfect artist. Okay, here's a perfect artist that would fit into that, like a later artist, Michael Jackson. I think Michael Jackson totally deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Biggest pop star ever. If you want to even just use the term rock and take the rock and roll part of it out of it, his songs, a lot of them are rock songs. You look at a song like Beat It, I mean, you have that epic guitar solo in it. You have you know, just the way some of the songs are even structured. It's I would even consider it just rock, you know what I mean? And
I mean, absolutely.
He was a very, very important later artist, you know, as important as some of those people like that you mentioned, like Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and some of those others. But Janet Jackson, did she have as much, like, would I say that it fits that same criteria? I mean, me personally, I'd say no, you know. But...
And we'll that's another thing. I you know, another question I had for you, if there were any artists that you felt that are in it that shouldn't be in it. And Janet Jackson is someone that I agree with. I can't wrap my head as to why she's in it. And that's the thing too, is there are artists, while I might not be the biggest fan of them, I can't deny the fact that they should be in it. To go off of Michael Jackson example, Madonna's kind of a similar example to that. I am by all means not a Madonna fan, right? While she is pop, it's very much rooted in rock. Her music is still very much rock music. While, yeah, there might be more of a focus on that pop side, the melodic side of it, right? At its core, the format is it's rock music, right?
There's three main qualms I have, and I don't know if you're okay with me just
Go
kind of
for it.
highlighting them, and they all kind of meld together here. There's three big issues that I have with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in this order. The first is sort of non rock artists getting in, or even more so in the case of someone like Madonna, not getting in before other certain artists. The second is an extension of that, the latter part of that, in artists that are that get inducted, say artists that say get inducted on their first year, or are artists that came decades after other artists that have never even been nominated that should be in there. So in other words, I'm okay with an artist like Madonna getting in, but I'm not okay with the fact that she was in way before somebody like, I mean, they just got in this year, but T-Rex. Like, T-Rex should have been in years and years ago. I have a problem with that, especially if you go by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's three big criteria, one of which is
big criteria
is influence, and influence is tremendously important. You know, I mean, despite my criticisms of a band like Metallica, I think they should be in the Hall of Fame. And even they themselves said when they got inducted, hey, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this artist. That they named off a bunch of artists that should have been in before them. That's a huge misfire on their part, and that's my big second. My third is the elitism aspect of it, which I think we'll get to. That is my biggest qualm with it.
So to kind of go off that a little bit, the elitism is in my top three as well. It might be my biggest issue.
Yeah, totally.
More than anything else. The timeline thing, I find myself getting less and less worked up over that. Because honestly, again, from the beginning, it's always been like that. I'm kind of just zooming as I'm listening to you. Like, I'm looking here. We can go, again, back to the beginning as far as, like, well, should have this person been in before that person? I mean, like, I'm looking at 1990, for an example. I see the Four Seasons and the Four Tops, right? But the Beastie Boys were inducted 2 years prior in 1988. Well, the Four Seasons were one of the biggest early influences for the Beach Boys. So I find myself I find myself getting, I've just come to accept that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's still,
I don't know, and I feel like the reasoning because of that has changed over time. I could be wrong about that. I don't know. Like I said, I think I've just become more accepting about that because that's just always been a thing from the beginning.
So what do you think are the big qualms? Like, what's like the biggest issues you have in terms of the way that the artists are inducted?
Honestly, my biggest issue is the criteria for who should and shouldn't be in. So, you know, even like that word influence can be a little scary to me sometimes, because while I do think that should be a reason for being in, I think impact needs to also be taken into consideration. I think impact and influence kind of go hand in hand. It just, you know, it needs to be less of a popularity contest. I don't think album sales should be taken into consideration, because now, using more recent examples, I don't think a band like Def Leppard should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't. Yeah, they had tons of singles in their day, and Def Leppard's fine. But when I think of impact and influence, I don't think of Def Leppard. I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah.
You know, and to really pick on that genre specifically, glam metal, that era of music to me is a joke as a whole. I have an issue when, like, I get rock and roll, you know, it's always been about style, right? But when that gets put before the music, which in glam metal it very much did, fuck off, you know? So I think of a band like that, I don't think should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Another band, while again, and this is the band I love, I don't understand why they're in it, and that's Journey. Journey's another band I have no idea why they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Probably because of the tremendous amount of hits and their popularity, I would assume.
But that's the problem I have.
Yeah.
Like, what they freaking do? You know, like really, at the end of the day, like what impact in rock and roll culture and influence did a band like Journey have? Yeah, we all love Journey. They have some of the greatest anthems, rock anthems ever. They're fun songs, nothing more, you know. So that, and again, that elitism, those are like really the two core things that I have issues with.
I think my biggest issue too is the actual process itself. The fact that there's this committee that just kind of
elaborate on that.
Well, the process of how the artists get nominated, that there's this committee of people who are music experts that just put out a list of names, and if you even though they have the fan vote, it's a minuscule part of the actual process.
Absolutely. I mean, take a recent example, like with Dave Matthews Band.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really care for the Dave Matthews Band, but they were amongst the popular vote.
Yep.
Number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. And they didn't get nominated.
Yep. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah.
I mean, not to make this a political thing, but like, you know, we talk about culture with rock and roll, right? It's the people, right? It's the people's music. Well, shouldn't something like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame be the people? The people, the music fan listener should be the one who is the vocal representation of who should be inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Not this fucking committee of 5, 6, 7 people.
Yeah,
popularity contest, dude. That's what it is. It's
it's of that Rolling Stone ilk and those kind of music critics where it's like
it's not even worse than that.
Yeah, if it's not something like, oh God, I'm trying to think of an artist. So if it's not like someone like, I don't know, and I love this band, but if it's not like the Stones, or if it's not like some of the more, I guess, contemporary rock artists that are the more like critically favored ones, then they're not, you know, there's like a bias against it. It drives me crazy. It just drives me absolutely. It's why a band like, for example, King Crimson is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah. Or, you know, like that's another thing. There's genres that are, or subgenres that just are, I think, don't have as much representation as others.
I was reading about that, and it does seem like with progressive rock being the biggest one, there are definitely certain genres that are almost like taboo.
Yep.
In terms of consideration for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and progressive rock, like I said, being the biggest one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see where else I read this.
That and probably metal. I would say.
Yeah, metal would be up there as well. Where is this? I can't find it. I don't want to waste any more time. But another one was, and I didn't even think of this, early 1960s top 40 hit songs, right? Which, again, when we mentioned those names, Ray Charles and James Brown, the guys that really forged this, right?
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff right there, all those great early 60s R&B singles, why aren't those guys mentioned as well?
Totally, yeah.
It's a popularity contest because, you know, this artist has been maybe irrelevant for 30 years. Yeah, maybe they were, but, you know, they influenced our guys like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. You know, guys that you over worship, who are a lot of, you know, musicians that I love, but it's like, come on, guys, come on.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I think all the, like, for example, I mean, there are bands that I will fight for that should be in there that I'm not a fan of. Like, I don't know what you think of this band. I'm gonna hurt my friend Kevin and my wife by saying this, but they know my opinion. I hate the band The Smiths. but I think they deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, absolutely. And
You know,
I
I
happen to
mean,
love the Smiths, but they should. And actually, that's a band that's surprising that hasn't been inducted yet.
but that's another sort of that's sort of like a kind of scene that isn't really represented very well. Like you know, the Smiths and a band like New Order, or you know, some of that post-punk, early art rock kind of stuff.
Post-punk, even
I
like
don't
that
think
college,
Eno's
like
in
80s
there.
alternative rock.
Yeah, I don't think Eno's in there. I mean, you got like the Talking Heads, but you have to have the Talking Heads.
Yeah, I think Eno's in the Hall of Fame.
I think
Maybe not actually.
Roxy Music just got
inducted.
in. And again, there's huge bands that took. I mean, like, I don't know what your opinion is, but like, why did it take so long for the Moody Blues to get in? They're a big band, and I would argue pretty influential as well. I mean, look how long it took Rush to get in. Look how long it took for Rush to even be considered to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I'm not sure if the Moody Blues need to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, to be honest with you.
Well, we disagree there, but still. Another one that bothered me was Zappa, because he was eligible for quite a while, and he didn't get in until after he died. Which
that's another gripe I have, is when an artist dies, for them to finally get in. I mean, like Lou Reed is another more recent example of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of insulting. It's like, you know.
So now I'm going to ask you two questions, because just some things you were saying kind of led into some of my questions that I have. Sure. So one, you gave us some examples already, but the one band more than anyone else that is not in the Hall of Fame should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and give us a reason why.
Oh man, I got to think
more
about
than
that.
Anyone else.
I wasn't really prepared for that question.
Well, I'm putting you on the spot, even better.
I'd have to think about it. The one that comes to mind is King Crimson, but I don't know, like, that's a personal bias for me. But I mean, I don't know if, like, objectively they're the big one, you know, but I'll just say, for the sake of argument, for me, King Crimson. Why? Court of the Crimson King created a subgenre, at least, of rock,
sure,
in my opinion. Have they sold as many albums as bands like Zeppelin? And if you're going by the criteria, not as much. They still sold tons of albums, and they have a huge following. And I feel like they're still around. They've endured many lineup changes, many different sounds, so many bands, you know, from many different genres, you know, every band, from any kind of band, from, you know, Nirvana even, was it Kurt Cobain was a huge fan of the Red Album, you know. You had lots of prog bands that cite them as an influence, metal bands that cite them as an influence, art rock bands that cite them as an influence, you know. They're, in terms of the influence category, and even in terms of, you know, I know they have to have a lot of record sales and all that stuff too. They haven't sold as much as the others, but I think they still deserve it. I don't know if they're the big one, but to me, that's a big glaring omission for sure.
Yeah, I put you on the spot there. Fair enough.
No, it's okay. I couldn't honestly think of one, but that's just the first one that kind of came to mind.
That's okay. Well, if you happen to think of another one, blurt it out. Interrupt me. I don't care what you do. But I think that was a good pick. I think that was a good pick, and I think you made a strong argument.
At one point, I would have maybe mentioned, until a few years ago, maybe said somebody like Deep Purple or something.
As you know, they're in, of course.
Yeah, but they just got in. There's a few that should have been in a long time ago that finally got in recent years. T-Rex was a big one for me. But yeah, I guess for me, I'd say King Crimson. How about you?
King Crimson, yeah. So like I said, you made a strong argument. One, which I agree with. And hey, listeners, by the way, if you are listening, hey, we did a whole series where we went through, shameless plug, the King Crimson discography. So check that out. Okay. But to answer your question, and yes, I did have time to think of mine, is a band that I've recently got into. And when I say recently, probably like within the last year, give or take-ish. More than anyone else, the Pixies.
Yes, I actually saw a list the other day, and saw that they weren't on it. I was like, what?
First of all, they haven't even been, I think, like King Crimson, actually. I don't even think they've been considered.
Yeah.
But if we want to talk about impact and influence, right? Radiohead, Nirvana. My argument could end right there. Radiohead and Nirvana, both bands who are in the Hall of Fame, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you got to think, even before, Nevermind came out and the cultural impact that had, and, kind of just destroying, everything that came before in the 80s. Before that was the Pixies. You wouldn't have the cultural impact of Nevermind if it weren't for the Pixies. They were very much like the Velvet Underground of the 80s. There's that what's kind of become a cliche quote by Brian Eno. Maybe only 10,000 people bought the Velvet Underground and Nico, but those 10,000 people all formed bands. It could be applied to the Pixies. The Pixies were definitely like the band that they were like, when we talk about Ray Charles and all those guys, our roots of what became rock music, the Pixies pretty much set up 90s alternative, period. Okay? But not even that. The Pixies were the reason, spoiler alert, because we'll get to it later on in our Bowie series, the Pixies are the reason why Bowie kind of started doing cool experimental music again, even though some of it's not great. But the Pixies were like the reason why Bowie got out of his terrible 80s influence funk and went back to basics and also started experimenting again, all because of the Pixies. So the Pixies even had a huge impact on the legendary David Bowie, let alone Nirvana, Radiohead, which would also become these big cultural phenomenons in the 90s, right? So that's my band more than anybody else, where I'm just flabbergasted as to why they haven't even been considered, let alone inducted.
And there's a ton of other ones,
but there are tons of more. We could be a whole separate rant series.
But do you see? That's why I was saying it bothers me so much when certain artists get in before other artists, because you have an example like that. Like if it wasn't for that band, a band like Nirvana might not exist. And it's like, I'm not saying that a band like Nirvana, again, not really a Nirvana fan, but that yes, they should be in it, but they shouldn't be in it before a band like the Pixies or lots of other bands that influence them,
And you're absolutely right, and I agree with that. Like I said, I think the timeline thing, I've just become accepting of it, but I don't disagree with you whatsoever.
It's still I see what you mean. Like you kind of accept it as like, yeah, that's just a thing that they do, blah blah blah. But it's still,
it's like with all my gripes with the Hall of Fame, like that's just like more so on the bottom tier of gripes, right? Because there's just so many.
No, it's true.
Pick and choose, I guess.
For you, what do you think are some of the bigger artists that you're like, they just shouldn't be in there?
Ooh, that's a good question. Bigger artists that shouldn't be in there. So I said Def Leppard and Journey already. Let's take a look here. Although it doesn't answer your question, I will say the one timeline issue I do kind of have is I don't have the exact year pulled up, but Rod Stewart was inducted in like 94-ish, right? Whereas the Small Faces were only inducted just a few years ago.
Yeah, let's see.
What? That's like that one exception in terms of timeline where I'm like, but you wouldn't have Rod Stewart if it weren't for the Small Face. Like, I get it. Rod Stewart, much bigger. Whatever.
Yeah, it's baffling.
Let's see here. I don't know. While I'm not a fan, Doobie Brothers, I guess I get it, right?
The Doobie Brothers had like a ton of hits, and I think were pretty influential. At least to that kind of straight up.
Here's another one I meant to say before, but didn't. Kiss.
Oh, I totally disagree with you there. You're gonna get a big. Gonna get a big disagreement there. Kiss was incredibly influential, whether you like them or not. I mean, they were incredibly influential to to a lot of hard rock and metal.
I guess, but
them.
even
shock rock. Don't forget shock rock. That was a huge.
Whatever.
No.
shock rock. I don't know.
It's important.
Even removing my own personal biases toward Kiss, I don't get it. I think they're like, if anything, they pioneered joke bands. They're a joke to me. They really are.
They still have, I still love Kiss. I have to disagree with you on Kiss.
Fair
So
enough. That's okay. Fair
they
enough.
they like I kind of understand with Kiss where you're coming from. There's a lot of people who are saying, oh, they're just a novelty act and all this stuff. And of course, like the merchandising and stuff, like I understand why people find that really cringy. But you can't
Yeah.
deny, like Kiss, like you were talking about with I don't know. Oh, you were talking about like some of the bands in the '90s. Kiss at a certain time were also a huge phenomenon, especially to a lot of kids in the '70s. I think I think they were really, really like, you can't deny how incredibly popular and the impact they had, whether you despise them or don't despise them.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure if I quite agree with the impact. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I know, like, I've obviously heard guys that I like have cited them. Maybe my personal opinion is overshadowing my thought process on this one.
You got to see them
Maybe.
live.
No, thank you. That's okay.
Not now. They suck now. If you had maybe seen them 10 years
Yeah.
ago.
Another one I was looking at. You're going to disagree with me on this one too.
Go for it.
Another one I don't like. Maybe I get the impact a little more than Kiss. Is Leonard Skinner.
I definitely disagree there too. Yeah.
I figured. Yeah.
Well,
but I get it a little more with them.
Well, yeah, Southern, like, you gotta think all. Number one, they had a ton of hits. Number two, they really pioneered that Southern rock sound, which became huge, and still exists to an extent. And also, a lot of that Southern.
No, it does, and that's where I get it with them.
See, it's
weird.
weird.
I'll take the Allman Brothers any day over Leonard Skinner.
Allman Brothers are amazing. I try to be objective with it. It is hard sometimes to look past your own biases in terms of bands.
Easier said than done, as we're clearly seeing already.
Oh, totally. Like, I'm trying to look through these artists. I think the big one I do have a problem with, I don't with certain artists here, is rap. And I know you might disagree with me.
Yeah, and I'm going to just say I strongly disagree with you on that one.
There are certain artists, I don't know if the Beastie Boys are on here.
The Beastie Boys, they might have just recently got inducted.
I know they did, because I believe the one member of the Beastie Boys died, like, I think it was like a year later or something like that.
I'm actually not seeing them on here.
I'm pretty sure they're on here, but I would say like a band like Beastie Boys, Run DMC, maybe.
No, the Beastie Boys are not on here. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
I'm sorry. I don't think rap fits that criteria, even the definition that you.
And so I knew, because I knew prior to this, you've always been vocal about rap thing.
And also, can I prerequisite here? I do like rap, especially like a lot of the artists that have been inducted that are rap artists. Sure. That's some of the rap artists I like Notorious Big just got inducted.
Yes, he did.
I'm a huge Biggie fan. I love like most of the stuff I've heard by him. I like Snoop Dogg a lot. I like the NWA that I've heard. A lot. Just, to me, that's too far removed from the, like, I think a lot of it was influenced.
Yes.
And a lot of early rap, I understand, sampled a lot of rock, but I still think that the sound and sort of mostly the sound. I don't want to say attitude, because actually the attitude is kind of rock, like that kind of.
The attitude is like punk rock as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's kind of like a punk rock attitude, but I don't think attitude carry music,
Yeah, I don't think that's the only similarity. And I think I said earlier in the episode that pop and rock probably have the most similarities. I actually kind of want to take that back a little bit, and I would make the argument, especially off this definition that I read at the beginning of the episode, that rap and rock probably are the most similar out of all of these. I mean, think about it, dude. I mean, they're both dance music. Early rock is danceable music. Hell, even later stuff, Talking Heads and that kind of stuff, it's danceable music, right? As is rap music. Simple melodies, heavy beat, check. They both have those things. rhythm, right? I mean, you don't have guitar as much with rap. With most artists, say Beastie Boys, Grandmaster Flash, stuff like that. Obviously, country, that's where they differ. But that 12-bar structure, they both have that. Maybe contemporary rap doesn't have that as much. That might be a little missing. And they have that, again, they have that rhythm section, that bass and the drums. I don't think they couldn't be any more similar, especially the acts that are already in the Hall of Fame.
But to give you an example, especially based on this is the weird analogy I'm going to use.
Go for it.
A tomato may be a fruit, but I don't think it belongs in my fruit salad. You know, with
as
a
soon
pineapple.
As you said tomato, I lost it.
You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't belong in the fruit salad. Like, it shares a lot of elements of rock. Yes, I will agree with that. Does it belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I don't think so. But maybe that's just my own bias. That's my bias towards certain, towards it, I guess. I don't know. And especially, maybe I'm putting too much stock in the influence category, because I think some rap influenced rock a bit, but I'm hard pressed to call it rock and roll. I'm sorry.
I mean, hey, like Grandmaster Flash, the first rap group, hip hop group to get in. I mean, they were rock too at their core, R&B as well too. I mean,
I would argue Grandmaster Flash belongs in there, but once you get past a certain point with rap, it's hard to me to consider it rock, especially.
That's where we agree.
Yeah.
That's where we agree.
Well, then that's probably what it is our line. See, again, problem with the definition. I kind of wish they would just call it Popular Music Hall of Fame, just change the name, make it, because I think it kind of sets a certain expectation, and that's why so many people have an issue with like artists like Biggie or NWA or people like Janet Jackson or stuff getting into the Hall of Fame, because when they think of rock, they think, or even rock and roll, they think, oh, hey, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Who, the Doors, Yes, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. They think of bands like that. They don't think of, you put an artist like Notorious Big in there, and they're like, what? That's not rock and roll. It's like I said, maybe it's kind of rock and kind of rock based, but I think that unfortunately the name kind of has a weight to it that makes it, do you get where I'm coming from?
There's a weight to it, but I think people have their own definition of it,
and that's the problem.
That's why I thought it was important to read what the definition of rock and roll was at the beginning of the episode, because your definition of what rock and roll is different from mine, and there's a level of subjectivity to it, but
and then the other problem there is that and maybe that wouldn't even be so much of a problem had so many bands and artists not been snubbed for so long, and and like the other things we talked about, the nominating process, the kind of elitism that goes with that, the bands that the artists that they chose that maybe most people wouldn't consider conventional rock and roll, and then snubbing so many other bands and so many artists for so long that deserved it years ago. It's kind of the whole snowball effect of all of it, which is where I think this big gripe that people like me have, again, T-Rex didn't get in for so long. Why did Janet Jackson get in so long before a band like T-Rex? That stuff like that drives me crazy, and I know it drives a lot of fans crazy. So it's an amalgamation of all of it,
and I think that's why at the end of the day, you're not going to get anyone to disagree and say, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's legit. I think we all think it's bullshit. We just might have different
reasons
as to why it is.
Yeah.
I want to apologize because actually I did finally see it. Not the Beach Boys. The Beastie Boys were inducted in 2012.
Yep,
and LL Cool J who inducted them. So apologies for that.
I think that might have been close to around when Rush got. No, I think Rush got inducted in 2013.
Rush was a few years later.
Yeah.
2012 was the Beastie Boys, the Blue Caps, the Comets, the Crickets, some really old stuff. minus the Beastie Boys. Donovan, Famous
Ugh.
Flames, Guns N' Roses, the Midnighters, the Miracles, Laura Nyro, I don't know who that is. Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the Small Faces.
The small.
Rush was a year after, 2013.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's weird the way they pick.
Yeah,
the way they pick certain artists. I don't get it. And didn't Radiohead get in?
Radiohead got it in 2017, I believe.
And look at a band like and this would be a good counter argument.
2019, I'm sorry.
This would be a good counter argument to you, probably for me, in terms of like the definition of rock, because this band probably isn't. But a band like Kraftwerk, look how influential they were to guys like Bowie, like Radiohead and stuff.
Sure.
There's a band that is not rock, like probably isn't rock and roll, but really should have been in for a long time because of the incredible influence they had on electronic music, but also not just electronic music, on a lot of electronic music being integrated into rock. Like we've talked about, guys like Brian Eno, guys like David Bowie, a band like Radiohead. So many other bands were influenced by a band, I guess a band named like Kraftwerk, and they haven't been in either. So
yeah, I think electronic music could sort of be like hip hop in that aspect, where do we draw the line before it doesn't become rooted in rock and roll, right? Because I think, like in hip hop, a lot of those early pioneering electronic artists, again, Kraftwerk,
I think
I'm even looking like Depeche Mode just got in this year. Like Depeche Mode were absolutely influenced by Kraftwerk.
Oh yeah, I think like the outliers like that deserve to get in because of the incredible influence they had on certain bands. But like you said, it's where do you draw the line there? At what point are you just now including everything else from this genre? A band like that, deserves it. Does other krautrock do Guru deserve to be in? I don't think so. I like Guru, but no. But
yeah. I think we're starting to find common ground here. Is really, and this was something I was pointing out pretty early in the recording, is impact and influence really are important, and maybe in some reasons should be the only things that are taken into consideration. Because when I think about like a group like Public Enemy, which yes, I know they're hip hop, but they are and should be in the Hall of Fame, because that Public Enemy was one of those earlier acts that fused rap and rock, right? That Public Enemy, we would have gotten Rage Against the Machine, who were huge. And yeah, we got some shitty new metal stuff that came out of that too. But my point being is they had a big impact on rock music as well. Right?
Yeah.
I had another question for you. I thought this was rather interesting, and I'll give you an example with what I mean with this question. Excuse me as I clear my throat. So say a popular band is in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Any band member in said band, assuming they had a solo career, does that mean by default they should be inducted into the Hall of Fame? So let me give you an example. So the Velvet Underground are in the Hall of Fame, as is Lou Reed. I feel that both the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Led Zeppelin is in the Hall of Fame, as they should be. Does that mean I think Robert Plant should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? No. So is there a line that's drawn there? I guess so. Again, my question is if a popular band like Led Zeppelin is in the Hall of Fame and all those guys had solo careers, does that mean by default, as solo artists, they should be in the Hall of Fame?
I don't think so. I mean, it depends on. Okay, like a perfect example. Should Black Sabbath be in the Hall of Fame? Yes, we know that, right?
Yes.
But I don't know. I really don't. I'll be honest. I don't know what the other members of the band did after. Well, Tony Iommi pretty much carried Black Sabbath the whole time. I don't know.
You can argue some of those Sabbath records are solo Tony Iommi records,
right? But they're still considered Black Sabbath. But should Bill Ward's solo albums be considered? No. Should Ozzy's solo career? I think it should be seriously considered.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, I guess you have to just take it on a,
because we go back to impact and influence, right?
I mean, it was the same thing with the Beatles. Now the Beatles would be the rare exception where I think that pretty much all of them deserve to have their solo careers in there too.
And they were all inducted pretty early. I think Lennon being the first one,
except for Ringo. Ringo took quite a while, but
right.
But yeah, I mean, with a band like the Beatles, I'd argue each of them had a very successful solo career and had enough hits and enough influence where they all deserved it. So
also had an impact in of itself, right?
Right. I think that's the thing. It has to have an impact in and of itself. Again, we just talked about Roxy Music. I think Brian Eno should probably get in. Should the other members of Roxy Music?
Should Brian Ferry need to be in? Probably not.
Probably not. So it just depends on, I guess, the artist. And here's the other thing that's really interesting too. You actually got me thinking, because I was thinking with Black Sabbath and stuff and those other bands. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's weird criteria in terms of what members of the band get inducted, I don't like either. That kind of really drives me crazy, because you have certain bands where, they had a billion, maybe not, well, not actually a billion, but, dozens of band members in some cases. How do you arbitrarily choose which members of the band are in? Like, for example, Deep Purple, okay? They had Rod Evans in, who was the original singer, but they didn't have the original bass player inducted. They had the whole Mark II lineup in, and then they had David Coverdale, and they had Glenn Hughes in. They didn't have Tommy Bolin in.
So I think that's where the elitism kind of comes into play. It's and like not on the artists, but on the Hall of Fame, right? Because you've got guys like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam who have been around for a very long time, but are still very relevant. Well, those guys got to invite every past band member, right? Even if it was a guy that played on like the debut EP, I don't know. Then you have a guy like Steve Miller Band were in, and there was that whole thing with him having issues with who he could and couldn't invite. It's like, great, finally he's being inducted, but why isn't he getting the same treatment? Why isn't Deep Purple getting the same treatment as, say, the Red Hot Chili Peppers or Pearl Jam? Because they're not as relevant today. That's a bunch of bull crap.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, especially if you have some cases where you have certain musicians that were on huge albums that just they're not in the Hall of Fame because of some arbitrary crap, It's
right.
Like, one thing was weird, like they like, I could see, for example, like not inducting a guitar player that was on an EP, that was only released on bootleg. I get that. But I feel like the criteria should be, if the band is getting inducted, either A, the band has discretion on who gets voted in, but there's even a problem there because you could have like internal politics there where maybe the band members don't want a certain person to be inducted that rightly deserves it, So it should be I kind of think it should be all or nothing, even if the band has like 40 members. That's my opinion. If they're on a studio record, it totally.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I think it's weird how that seems to apply for certain acts and where it doesn't for others.
Yeah, it is.
And that's just more confusion. So why or you don't understand the way the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does things.
Or what about the fact that, like, what about a guy like the one that comes to mind is Bob Seger got inducted, right? Why does his band? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. Yeah.
A guy like Bob Seger, he got inducted, right? Why is his band not inducted? He has people that are still in that band that were in the band in like '68. Why are those musicians not inducted with him? Or
that whole thing's weird in of itself. Like Neil Young's another example of that. Neil Young was inducted in the '90s. How come Crazy Horse is never?
Yeah, I mean, why,
But
why
then
are
the
those?
E Street Band was inducted separately from Springsteen. Like, I don't get it.
It's stuff like that people kind of scratch their heads and they're just like, what? Like, why aren't
Right.
some of these musicians being inducted with, like, rightly with them? Like, I understand, make it a rule where that not all of them can make a speech if there's, like, 20 members of a band,
Sure, we'll be here all night. Yeah.
Yeah, but, like, you can't, I don't see how you could just imagine what it's going to be like if King Crimson ever gets inducted. Who are they going to pick? There's been literally dozens of members of that band. How can you just arbitrarily pick certain? I could kind of think of like maybe 10 musicians from King Crimson maybe that I would pick, but that doesn't mean that those other band members don't belong in there too. It's weird.
Sure. Yeah. Any compliments that you have for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
No.
I'll say I have one. I have one compliment, and that's the exhibit itself.
Oh, I've never been, so I can't comment on it.
I went for it was like my high school senior trip or something like that. So it was a long time ago. But the exhibit is cool. So what they do is they have their first floor, which has all the memorabilia and shit. So like just some things I remember. I remember the red leather jacket that Michael Jackson wore at the Thriller video. I remember seeing Jerry Garcia's guitar. I remember seeing Prince's guitar. I forget which Aerosmith song it was, but I remember seeing the piece of paper that Steven Tyler wrote the lyrics to. Might have been Dream On. I don't remember. But then what they do for the second and third floor, I believe, is what it is that's where they'll pick an artist and they'll I don't know how often they rotate the individual exhibits, but every so often they do. And when I went, there was one for Pink Floyd and one for Bruce Springsteen, I believe it was.
Nice.
The other one. And I didn't really care about the Bruce Springsteen one, but the Pink Floyd one was really cool. Seeing from like artwork from like The Wall to Sid Barrett's guitars, Gilmore's guitars, stuff like that. And then of course there's the history behind it.
There's some baggage with that.
What's that?
There's some baggage with that too, because I've seen a couple interviews with a few different artists who aren't in the Hall of Fame, who have things in the Hall of Fame. Right. So the Hall of Fame's like, hey, we want your, whatever in here. I think the one that I laughed at was Lemmy from Motorhead. I saw an interview with him, and he's like, yeah, I gave him he was like one of his jackets or something. I think it was like the jacket he wore on the Ace of Spades album cover. Okay. And he's like, yeah, I never got it back. He's like, so he's like, do I feel like I need to get in the Hall of Fame? He's like, no, I feel like they owe me a jacket.
Motorhead's not in the Hall of Fame. Wow.
Yeah, Motorhead's not in the Hall of Fame. There's another one.
That's crazy.
It's, I don't know. But so you got that. It's like, wait a minute. So you want some of these artists' things in there, some of their like memorabilia stuff. So, oh wait, we got Lemmy's jacket. We got Ian Anderson's flute. We got Yes's, we got Chris Squire's bass before he was a Yes or whatever. It's like, but you're not going to put him in the Hall of Fame? Like, what is...
That's crazy Motorhead's not in the Hall of Fame. And they're another band I'm not the biggest fan of. I think they're good. I just, not my cup of tea, right? But like, fuck, I would even say put Motorhead over the fucking Kiss. Give me a break.
Well, I mean, and they got nominated for the very first time this past year, and they didn't get it.
Okay.
And so did Thin Lizzy for the first time, and Judas Priest for it's like the third time or something they didn't get in. And it's like
that's interesting. I don't know. Let's think about that. I could go either way at Judas Priest. I'm not sure if they need to be in it or not.
I think their influence on metal is undeniable.
Yeah, no, it is. And by the way, I like Judas Priest. I'm not knocking Judas Priest.
Oh yeah.
Thin Lizzy's another one too. I'm not sure.
Thin Lizzy, I can kind of understand why somebody would say maybe they shouldn't be in. Yeah. But even so, it's like I personally think they should be in, but I don't know.
I like Thin Lizzy too, but I don't know if they need to be in it. That's I don't know.
Get back to
interesting.
But yeah, I think that was all I had. I mean, I could probably keep going on and on about this.
We could keep going on. And look, to be clear, bottom line, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is bullshit.
Yep.
It's bullshit.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, this is for you.
Yep. Right back at you. Not a Jew, by the way. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. Yeah, fuck the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think, like I said, like we've been saying throughout, this episode, we might have disagreements, on certain, aspects of the Hall of Fame. But I gotta say, I think we've been wanting controversy. This might have been the most controversial thing.
Yeah, finally, yeah.
Which is funny because we both agree that it's stupid at the end of the day, but we definitely have different arguments.
Well,
that's the fun of it.
I also feel like we've, when we used to debate about music when we were in our early 20s, for you, I think late teens, or for the first part of that, we've learned how to have a civil argument. I have one more point about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'm done, that I just remembered I wanted to bring up. And I think we can agree on this one. I think, despite all we've said today about, why do they do this, and what's the motivation behind that, I think everybody knows it's money. And I think by inducting the bigger artists, they get the big band for the year, or the big pop artist or whatever. I think a lot of
ticket sales, right?
I think a lot of it is ticket sales and notoriety and having a big show with, you get Bruce Springsteen comes up and plays with Paul McCartney, and you got to do. You're not gonna get that with King Crimson, or the Pixies, or you know what I mean, or or Captain Beefheart, you know what I'm saying? There's no way you're any of them.
Captain Beefheart.
I don't know if he
should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, by the way.
I could understand if somebody didn't. I guess Trout Mask is pretty big, but the point is,
like
you're not going to
avant-garde, like rock, But
yeah,
anyways,
but the point is, you're not gonna get the big, you need the star power of those some of those bands. I guess Rush finally got in because they transcended all the bias against them, and they're like, oh, we can get Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
We get the Foo Fighters because that's the only rock band they ever. Dave Grohl's the only guy they ever summoned to any of these big popular music events.
So I know, fuck Dave Grohl. Just
I don't mind him. I don't mind the Foo Fighters.
I got my gripes with Dave Grohl. No one seems to understand it, but that's all right. Maybe for another time.
Well, that being said, unless you have anything else to say, I think that's our.
No, dude. I think this was fun. I think like you said, we were civil, and that's what's important, guys. Is being civil. It's okay to debate. It's okay to disagree. Just be civil about it. My God, just this world we live in right now, and all these controversial political issues. It's fine.
You're not allowed to
be a civil human being.
You're not allowed to have a contrary opinion in 2020.
Seriously, whether you're having a simple-minded, discussion such as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or if you're having a more complex, conversation such as, politics. I don't know. Just be civil, man.
Folks, I've talked to people with completely different opinions of me about music, politics, religion, all those sensitive subjects. Be civil and be willing to hear the other person's argument. Don't just dismiss them. Because
absolutely,
if you never hear a contrary opinion, you never grow. So sometimes you got to hear stuff that you might not like, that you might even be ready for it, offended by. And sometimes we have to do that to grow a little bit. It's important. So don't cut anybody down.
No.
But that being said, I don't think anybody's gonna defend the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, seriously. Having said that, we're all in agreement here. But listen, guys, I hope you enjoyed the debut episode of the Andy and Rob Rants. I think we're sticking with that, by the way. Andy and Rob Rants.
Sure.
This is a series in of itself. Yes, Bowie is still continuing on. As a matter of fact, I believe if you're listening to this recording, the next recorded Bowie episode should be low. We did record Station to Station about a month ago. If you're listening, actually at the, time of this recording, Station's not out. By the time you're listening to this, Station will be out. I'm all over the place here. My point is we've said that we're going to expand. We're doing it. So expect more Andy and Rob rants. Expect more top 10s, top whatever. Expect other stuff that we're going to be doing, and the discography discussion will, of course, continue.
And I'm loving the Zoom method here. It's gonna make my life so much easier. So
Yeah, me too. My lighting will be better next time, I promise. I've got some ideas in my head as how I'm going to make that better. But, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, of course, this episode, as long as I can't talk, it's time to end this thing if I can't talk anymore. This episode, as well as any other content that we continue to record, will also be available on Spotify, Apple Music, Pocket Cast, whatever podcast app you use, or you can see our beautiful faces on YouTube.
Yes.
Whichever preference you have.
Yes.
Anything else?
I'm good, man. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Peace.